Truth versus power. Jasmine Crockett's congressional showdown. The air inside the United States Capitol was electric, charged with tension as millions watched live. This wasn't just another congressional hearing. It was a battlefield dressed in marble. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a firebrand forged in courtrooms, was about to face off against newly appointed FBI Director Kash Patel. The hearing's official title read, "The Role of Law Enforcement in Media Accountability and Political Neutrality," but the real question hanging in the air was far more dangerous. Who decides what truth is? Jasmine entered first, her navy suit sharp, her eyes sharper. She carried herself with the quiet defiance of a woman who had earned her voice the hard way. Then came Patel, moving as if the room already belonged to him. Gray suit, calculating eyes, scanning like a tactician. The gavel fell, and Jasmine didn't hesitate to claim the first word. "Thank you for being here today. Director Patel," she began, her voice smooth but anchored with steel. "I'm sure this room feels comfortable to you. It's built for people who look like you. But let me be clear. Today, comfort's not the point. The truth is..." Some heads turned. Some smirked. Some winced. Patel remained still, but his jaw clenched ever so slightly. Patel didn't bristle. Instead, he leaned forward with a barely perceptible smile. "I came here with the law in my head and fairness in my heart, not to play politics like some others seem intent on doing." The chamber grew quiet. What had begun as formal procedure now pulsed with confrontation. By framing his appearance as noble and hers as performance, Patel had done something dangerous. He'd stripped her argument of legitimacy without engaging it. Jasmine recognized the move. It wasn't just a slight. It was a calculated tactic, a reminder that women like her, outspoken, intelligent, unafraid, were always one sentence away from being painted as irrational. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was the quiet before the storm. "You've made bold claims about protecting this country from misinformation," she continued, each word measured but unflinching. "But let's get honest. Who defines what's false? You, a federal agency with no voters to answer to? Or a system that changes its definition depending on who's in the crosshairs?" Patel's answer came like a blade across stone. "False is when information is deliberately twisted to deceive voters. I don't need public consensus to identify that. I need evidence." Jasmine reached for a document, holding it just high enough for cameras to catch the seal. "The First Amendment," she said, her voice neither loud nor soft, but absolute. "Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or the press." That's not a suggestion. That's a boundary. And today, you're standing on the wrong side of it. She let the words settle. When a government official starts talking about prosecuting journalists based on what they report, we are no longer talking about accountability. We're talking about suppression. And when you as a head of federal law enforcement agency imply that your interpretation of truth should determine who gets a subpoena, that is not enforcing the law. That is shaping the narrative. The room was silent. Patel slid a thick folder across the desk. "Since we're talking about consequences, let's not ignore what happens when the press treats fiction like fact." Inside were highlighted headlines and reports. "This broadcast," he said, tapping one page, "ran false claims about election fraud for 3 consecutive nights. Within 48 hours, organized protests turned violent. 4 arrests, 2 officers hospitalized." He paused to let that land. "These aren't stories. They're sparks. And when the right fuel is present, sparks become fire." "You're not wrong that lies can cause harm," Jasmine replied, her voice quieter but colder. "But let's not pretend you brought that file to talk about harm. You brought it to justify control. You cherry-picked the worst examples of press failure to give unelected agencies the power to define what's real and what's not. That's not justice. That's fear management." Her tone didn't rise, but the room felt smaller with every word. And fear is exactly what authoritarian governments rely on to silence the people they claim to protect. Then came the line that cracked the atmosphere open. "You don't want the truth. You want censorship. And that's what dictators do." The chamber erupted. Outside on the Capitol lawn, pockets of applause broke through the cold D.C. air as onlookers watched on massive screens. But Jasmine wasn't done. She reached into another stack of documents and withdrew a single page with quiet finality. Director Patel, she began, her voice heavy with gravity. According to publicly available records, you attended the Reawaken America tour in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You didn't just attend. You signed a formal endorsement letter. You stood beside speakers who invoked violent rhetoric, who promoted QAnon, a group the FBI itself has classified as a domestic threat. She tapped the signature with her index finger. That's your name, sir. Your presence, your approval. So let me ask you clearly, directly, and under oath, did you go there to listen, or did you go there to lend legitimacy to extremism? The question hung in the chamber, like smoke after a detonation. Patel didn't respond immediately. 3 full seconds of weaponized stillness passed before he finally spoke. I'm not afraid of dialogue, he said, his voice intentionally composed. What I fear is the kind of person who covers their ears the moment they hear something uncomfortable. That's where democracy goes to die, not in disagreement, but in silence disguised as certainty. Jasmine knew he had sidestepped the question entirely. The system around him might just let him get away with it. Cornered, Patel reached for something older and more insidious. With respect, Congresswoman, he said, locking eyes with Jasmine, you've turned this hearing into something it was never meant to be. Every time we get close to the core legal questions, you steer us back into emotion, into race, into history. His voice was even his hands still. You're not defending the Constitution. You're using it as a stage. You're making this about your story, your identity, because you know it makes you untouchable. Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward, not to strike back, but to stand her ground. Let's get something clear, she began, her voice steady. Don't confuse truth with what makes you uncomfortable. They're not the same thing. Truth doesn't owe you comfort. It owes you honesty. As a black woman in this country, I don't have the luxury of being wrong and still being called patriotic. I don't get to lie and have the benefit of the doubt. I don't get to bend the truth and be forgiven as passionate or misunderstood. The chamber didn't explode. It stopped. One lawmaker placed her pen gently on the table and started to clap, not loudly, but with intention. Others followed. For her final question, Jasmine cut to the heart of what everyone watching really wanted to know. Director Patel, if there is evidence that a politician has broken the law, whether they sit on the right or the left, will you act? Will you prosecute them with the same urgency, the same force? Or are you here to apply justice like a scalpel, aimed only at your enemies, but never your allies? The moment didn't just challenge his authority. It questioned whether anyone should be deciding what Americans can and can't believe. Patel's answer came precisely rehearsed. I don't serve any individual. I serve justice. And if that pursuit of justice leads to someone powerful, someone on the left, someone on the right, I won't hesitate. It sounded perfect. Too perfect. A response without courage. By evening, the hearing had shattered viewing records. Over 11.8 million live viewers watched as Jasmine refused to make her truth more palatable for institutional comfort. The next morning, a new bill appeared in the official docket. The CRCKT Act, sweeping protections for journalistic integrity and explicit legal barriers against politically motivated surveillance of journalists. At the top, in honor of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, whose clarity under pressure illuminated the urgency of action. Later that day, Jasmine stepped outside to face the press gathered at the Capitol steps. A reporter called out, Congresswoman Crockett, do you believe you won yesterday? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes swept the crowd before she replied, No, I didn't win, but the truth did, and that's the only victory I ever needed. Jasmine had done more than stand her ground. She had redrawn the map of what ground was even allowed to be claimed. She exposed the oldest truth in American justice. Systems don't resist truth because they don't understand it. They resist it because it threatens the story they're built to protect. Her voice may have pierced the silence, but what she started wasn't an ending. It was an invitation to all of us, a reminder that truth doesn't need volume or permission. It needs conviction, courage, and sometimes just one voice that refuses to let silence become policy.